Your college basketball weekend is here.
Rise and fire. Count it. Instant classic. The slipper still fits.
When they need baskets, they go to them.
2 to tie, a 3 will win it.
From Cinderella runs to covering at the buzzer, we've got your winning playbook covered. This is BetMGM U with Chris Mack, RJ Choppy, and John Martin on the BetMGM Network.
And just like that, we're down to the final 3 weeks of the regular season. Where the hell did it go? College basketball season is racing by. We are jumping on the moving train, getting you going every single weekend here, Friday nights and Saturday mornings, live coast to coast on the BetQL network, and always here for you in podcast form. Simply download us, search BetMGMU inside your free Odyssey app, AUDACY. It is BetMGMU, presented by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas, alongside John Martin and RJ Choppy. I'm Chris Mack, and there is a lot to talk about, boys. As I mentioned, 3 weeks of the regular season left. 4 weekends from now, we'll be watching the brackets get revealed. And before you know it, 6-7 weeks from now, we'll be talking about crowning a new champ. We'll get into some of those title odds and what makes sense. We'll talk about which bets we like for this weekend specifically as well. It's all on the way, so hang in there, strap in, where you can watch the show as well on YouTube on the Odyssey Sports channel. But let's start with what happened last weekend. We had number 1 and number 2 both falling. We had Duke losing to Clemson as 6.5-point favorites. We had Auburn losing to Florida, not just losing to Florida by 9, nearly double digits, but losing to Florida without Walter Clayton. So, make of those what you will. We said it last week, John. Every team is going to hit a speed bump or two at this point in the season, as conference play is you're in the teeth of it. I don't want to call it the dog days, because conference play is 2 or 3 months long, and then you look up and you're talking about who's on the bubble and who's on the bracket lines and who's where. But it feels like everybody is meeting those opportunities to stumble a bit and give us reason to raise questions at this point of the year.
Yeah, and I think, listen, when you sort of look underneath the hood a little bit at those 2 losses in particular that you're talking about, we've talked about Florida here on the show. I mean, they're a title contender, right? They're in that mix. And it's at home, and yeah, the way it happened obviously was a bit weird. It may be concerning if you even wanted to take it there for Auburn. But listen, Auburn's done a million good things this year. They've kind of proven that they belong at the top. And then as far as Duke and Clemson goes, I think Clemson's one of those teams that can make another Elite Eight run. I mean, don't forget they did that a year ago. I mean, and they brought mostly everybody back. Shefflin's back, Hunter's back. I mean, Locken they added, he's out there making threes. I mean, that's a tough guard, especially there. So yeah, I mean, I don't think there's much shame in those 2 teams going down. Obviously, it does show they are vulnerable in some ways. Like, there's certain ways that if you're going to beat them, it has to look a certain type of way. But no, listen, I think all 4 of those teams involved in that discussion can make second weekend type runs.
There's no shame in any of them going down right now. Like, I mean, it is such a gauntlet out there. If you're Auburn, I mean, you just happen to run into the number 6 team in the nation, and they can beat you on any given night. I mean, just go look at the net, go look at the Ken Palm, and you find all these teams are all right there. And I mean, a road game, road environment. Dickie V's back. I mean, everything's crazy. It's just. Yeah, I mean, you can't really say anything. I mean, the pollsters showed you the same. I mean, they didn't move Auburn. Auburn's resume is so amazing. They're like, nah, we're good. I don't even. But they lose a handful of first place votes. That's it. It didn't really change anything. So yeah, I think that this is just it's the nature of the sport. Auburn's earned the right to lose to the number 6 team in the nation. And they could probably lose to the number 2 team in the nation this weekend, and they'll be like, oh, I mean, they're still fine. It's a speed bump. Everyone's going through it.
That's exactly what I was going to bring up next, Choppy. I'm glad you mentioned it, is, how much movement do we see even in – look, we got the first SEC 1 versus 2 game in the history of the conference, right? Iron Bowl, Bama, Auburn this weekend. We'll get into that game specifically in a couple minutes here on the show, but when you're looking at the 1 and 2 lines in anybody's bracket right now, I think you're legitimately looking at just about any team that can knock off any other team. This isn't one of those years where it feels like as great as Auburn has been, as good as they are, as good as Duke has been at times, as dominant as they've been. Bama, who, again, we just mentioned and will be right there throughout the conversation down to the very bitter end, we think. I don't feel like necessarily any 1, 2, or even 3 teams is head and shoulders out ahead of anybody else, John. It feels like there really truly is a pack of maybe half a dozen that you can look at as legit title contenders, at least that many.
Yeah. I mean, I think you could probably, if we all sat down together, we could probably come up with 10, maybe more. Because I personally think you got your teams at the top, right? I mean, let's go through them. I mean, I think we could do this exercise live here. Auburn, Duke, Houston, Florida, Bama, Iowa State. I think that you start with those, and then we can argue about Tennessee, we can argue about Texas Tech, we can argue about Gonzaga, we can argue about St. John's. So yeah, I mean, listen, I do. I think there are some teams out here, like even in Kentucky, right? Kentucky sweeps Tennessee. Great job for them. But they lose Lamont Butler. For how long, we'll see. And defensively, they certainly do have questions, although they've picked it up. So the question is, who are they? Are they what we've seen defensively the last 3 games from them? Are they more the team we saw in the first 2 to 3 months? But they could be a team, right? If that defensive improvement is real, they could be in the mix. So yeah, you have a lot of different teams and a lot of teams that do a lot of good, like Illinois, streaky, it's those kinds of teams you could see making real runs. So I think there's a longer list than maybe we're accustomed to in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, the issue that Kentucky runs into is like they play tremendous against good teams. Like they top 10, top 5 teams. They have 5 top 10 wins this year. It's insane. But then they'll fall asleep against Ohio State, or they'll fall asleep against Georgia. And it would not surprise me. Kentucky is the one team. If you told me they were in the Final Four, all right, I buy it. And if you told me they lost on the first day, they lost on that Thursday to Colgate or whoever, I could see that. I could totally see that happening. And that's Kentucky right now. And they play a brand of basketball. Like if they're hitting their shots and they're motivated defensively, they are impossible to beat.
So since we have what feels like a deeper field,
at least for Tennessee. They're at least impossible to beat.
Yeah, that's true.
Just twist the knife just a little bit more on Choppy.
I got to get one in on him. I got to get one.
How are we a favorite in that game? They saw what happened 2 weeks prior in Knoxville. How are we a favorite in that game?
Yeah, that was weird. I mean, you had a chance, though. What were you up 3 there with like 3 minutes left? I mean, you did kind of take the lead back. They made outrageous shots.
Yeah. Mark, how about Mark Pope? Never won a tourney game. Zach just threw that up in our chat.
I mean,
screen.
that was why when he got the job, I'm like, yo, like, you guys ran off John Calipari for a dude that has never even won a tournament game. Like, and you know what? I mean, right. I look pretty stupid. He looks great.
And now here comes Cal and the Hogs.
Don't look now.
Here they come.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, they're a different team since Boogie Flan went down.
Well, and there's a lot to be said for if you're going to suck out loud, do it in December and January when nobody's paying attention. Look at Kansas State right now. You suck out loud early conference slate, first half of the conference slate even, and then all of a sudden you wake up right around Super Bowl, Valentine's Day time, and you decide to hit the gas then. People are going to take notice of those wins a whole lot more than they are the losses you had in late December, January, early February, John.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Kansas State, man, specifically. Like Kansas State spent more than anybody in the portal. I mean, Coleman Hawkins is making $2 million a year, and if you adjust and modify it, since January 20th, Kansas State is the best team in America, according to Bart Torvik. It's not like that. It's crazy. Like who would know that? Who would know that? But they are. They beat Kansas. They beat Iowa State. They beat Arizona State. I mean, they are absolutely rolling right now. And, it would not shock me if they get to the tournament and win a game or two at all, honestly.
I don't know if you guys have sleepers when we start to talk about title odds, because that's where I was going to go before we got sidetracked a bit there by the Mark Pope thing and Cal and the Hogs and Kansas State. But, you've got Auburn and Duke right around 4-1. You got Houston and Bama right around 9-1, Florida 12-1 at BetMGM, Tennessee 16, Iowa State 18. Then you start to get out a little bit longer, right? Kansas is there at 30, as well as UConn, Kentucky, Michigan State, Arizona, or thereabouts. You mentioned Texas Tech earlier, John. That is an interesting one for me. If we're looking at 35-1 or better, depending on where you shop it, we just talked about them last week and how they are able to grind you into dust and win a 54-49 game. They also showed us in the last week that they are willing to throw up triple digits if they have to, granted in double overtime, but they are willing to throw up 95 or 100 if they have to win a game. They have really impressed me over the last 3 to 4 weeks with how they are showing everybody they can win in different ways now.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I would say is I'd like to see their defensive numbers be a tick better, but I mean, I'm nitpicking at this point. I mean, Grant McCaskey's done a great job there, and JT Toppin against Arizona State in that double overtime win just put together one of the best games that we've seen in the last 30 years. I mean, that's not an exaggeration. Like 41-15, bunch of steals, get the win. I mean, you're right. At 35-1, that team is absolutely live. I mean, again, you got good coaching. You've got the ability to defend, when you want to, and you can score. I mean, you're ninth in the country in KenPom in scoring, second in the Big 12. So, yeah, man, I mean, Texas Tech certainly would be one of those teams you get down the board, I think you'd have a fun time, putting that slip in.
Nobody wants to play them. Like if you see them as like a 3 seed in your region, like that, whatever number one gets them as the 3 in their region, is like, I don't want to see that, man. Like they can do some damage to you. They're well coached. They play a brand of basketball. They can, if they want to slow it down. Like, who wants to play that style of ball? Like they're a team that I do not think a 1 seed wants to see anywhere near. Fortunately, would have seen them to the Elite 8, but that's a tough draw.
Who else you guys like when we start to scan down the board a little bit farther besides Texas Tech? Maybe I look at. I thought Purdue was starting to look like one of those teams. They lose to Michigan. Granted, it's on the road in the Big Ten. Make of that what you will. There are a couple other teams in that 30-50 range, 30-1 to 51 range, John, that feels like I don't like any of them as much as I like Texas Tech, but there are a couple more out there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think St. John's at 35-1 is interesting. They obviously lost to Villanova earlier in the week, but that was a tough spot. They'd won 10 in a row. They'd beat UConn at UConn. I mean, I think Gonzaga at 50-1 is insane. I really do. I mean, they're 18th at KenPom, and you look at their offensive and defensive numbers from an efficiency standpoint. They're 7th in the country in offensive rating. 42 in defensive rating, which leaves a lot to be desired, but basically the same profile as the Texas Tech we were just talking about. And you're getting them at 50-1. I mean, I know they've underwhelmed. I know they've disappointed in conference play, but I've always liked their 3 big looks that they can kind of throw you. I mean, I don't know if they can win a title, right? I mean, that's always the problem. They have to go win the title, but I just think that's one of those bet slips that you'll have, working for you, in the Sweet 16. It'll be a good time.
I think A&M at 40-1. Guard play plays this tournament, and they've got pretty good guard play. They're not I don't think that I would consider them a title contender, but if they show up on this, on the Elite 8 Saturday or Sunday, I mean, that would not surprise me at all. I don't think that I'd want to see A&M around.
Yeah, the Big 12 and SEC teams are the ones that I'm keeping an eye on right now. You mentioned Gonzaga. I think we've all had kind of a side eye towards them since really the beginning of the season, just because they put themselves to the test in non-conference play and then just kind of, I don't want to say coast, but that's kind of what we're seeing. they coast, lose focus at times in West Coast Conference play, and then all of a sudden look up, it's tournament time, and they refine that edge that they seemingly have early in the year under Mark Few. All right, we got a number 1, number 2 matchup to talk about. The first time it's ever happened in the SEC, and it's the Iron Bowl on the court. I mentioned the Big 12, a big one there, as that Houston Cougars team that we have talked about a lot lately has a big one against Arizona. And we mentioned the Big 10. Nobody wants to go on the road in the Big 10, especially to Champaign. We'll talk Michigan State, Illinois as well. Get you our best bets. It's all on the way as we are live coast to coast on the BetMGM network here alongside John Martin and RJ Choppy. I'm Chris Mack. This is BetMGM-U.
You've been listening to BetMGM-U on the BetMGM network. If you missed any of the show, listen back anytime on the Odyssey app. Download the BetMGM app today. Please gamble responsibly. Get ready to experience the ultimate fusion of wagering and entertainment. This is the BetMGM Network. Kicking off your morning with the Daily Tip with Michael Jenkins and Chelsea Messenger.
Over.
It's a very simple way to look at it. It's the best way to look at it.
Followed by the newly branded Bet Sweats with Joe O and Sammy P.
When I stop talking, that's when you jump in usually.
He said, ring that bell! He said, ring that bell!
Then it's You Better You Bet, hosted by Nick Costos and Femi Abebefe.
Great teams and great players get a whistle. It's happened forever. It will continue to happen.
Capped off every night with the electric Brad Evans and Ryan Horvat on BetMGM tonight.
Oh, that's a sexy phrase.
Quote Dr. Dre, creep with me and walk with me on this one.
Welcome to a new era of wagertainment. This is the BetMGM Network. Please gamble responsibly. Get ready to experience the ultimate fusion of wagering and entertainment. This is the BetMGM Network. Kicking off your morning with the Daily Tip with Michael Jenkins and Chelsea Messenger.
Over.
It's a very simple way to look at it. It's the best way to look at it.
Followed by the newly branded Bet Sweats with Joe O and Sammy P.
When I stop talking, that's when you jump in usually.
He said, ring that bell! He said, ring that bell!
Then it's You Better You Bet, hosted by Nick Costos and Femi Abebefe.
Great teams teams and great players get a whistle. It's happened forever. It will continue to happen.
Capped off every night with the electric Brad Evans and Ryan Horvat on BetMGM tonight.
Oh, that's a sexy phrase.
Quote Dr. Dre, creep with me and walk with me on this one.
Welcome to a new era of wagertainment. This is the BetMGM Network. Please gamble responsibly. Let's get back to BetMGM on the BetMGM Network.
Live coast to coast on the BetMGM Network every Friday night and Saturday morning alongside my guys RJ Choppy and John Martin. I'm Chris Mack. We got you covered. Getting you ready for a busy weekend of college hoops. Mentioned it at the top of the show. We're just 3 weeks from the end of the regular season. 4 weeks now and some change from Selection Sunday. And 5 weeks from setting the Sweet 16. It's wild to me that we have looked up and all of a sudden the college basketball season is right here. The meat of it has arrived, and we're going to talk about 3 massive games this weekend. A big one in the Big 12. I mentioned Houston and Zona. We'll get into that in a moment. Michigan State visiting the Illini in Champaign. But let's start with what is the biggest game. I don't know, John, biggest game in SEC conference regular season history maybe. The 45th 1v2 matchup in college basketball history. The number one team, only 2 games better than 500 if you want to grade out all those matchups, 23 and 21. Last time was 3 years ago. We had Gonzaga, number 1 in the country, against number 2 UCLA. This time it is Auburn at Bama. Bama's won 7 in a row, fresh off their best offensive performance of the season. 103 they hung on Texas, who is quickly plummeting. Bruce Pearl, for what it's worth, 4-6 against Nate Oates all time, or at least in this rivalry, John. Bama, Auburn. We talked about the fact that no one's going to walk away from this one with their resume severely harmed, but This is an opportunity, especially for Auburn, I think, on the road at Tuscaloosa to really put a stamp, plant a flag in the ground on that number 1 spot and maybe not come off of it for the rest of the regular season.
Yeah, I mean, it's an obviously amazing game, and it's a rivalry game, and we're used to this game mattering in football, not as much in basketball, but obviously it does. And you're right. Alabama against Texas looked like juggernauts. I mean, I watched the whole game, and I was just blown away. I was blown away by their shot making, blown away by how good their shots are, like just the looks they get, and the looks they generate. Bruce Pearl is really good in these spots, I will say. I remember going all the way back to 2008 in another 1-versus-2 matchup that he was involved in. He was the number 2 team, so it's a little different. Now he's the number 1 team, but I remember him coming into Memphis, and he had everybody going, man. He got up there on the table at Rendezvous to all his fans that were there, and he said, "Nobody thinks we're gonna win this game." Now, never mind, it was like a pick 'em, basically, right? But he's like, "Nobody thinks we're gonna win this game. We're gonna go in here. We're gonna show them." He's taking off his shirt. He's going crazy. And that is where Bruce Pearl is absolutely at his best, right? And they did. They went into Memphis and they knocked off number 1 Memphis Tigers. That is where he's at his best. He's done it before. So I when we start talking about, I like Bama, and I do like Bama in the game, but if I was going to talk about something that gives me pause, is that Bruce Pearl's been the road team in these games before, and he's found ways to come out of that building with wins. And, that experience could probably be very helpful in a game like this one.
Man, I'm still trying to figure out what bizarro world we're in that Alabama and Auburn is number 1 and number 2 in basketball. Like that. I went to school in this conference. This was not a thing. It was Kentucky and a little bit of Arkansas, and and a little bit of Florida, and that's about it. And I what bizarro world we're in here, but man, John hit it on the head. I mean, Bruce Pearl, he relishes these kind of moments. I mean, he is going to have whatever 3 Auburn fans find a way to get tickets for this game. I mean, he is going to have them the loudest 3 fans in the country, and he's going to have his team believe it, and they should believe. I mean, they've been the best team all year by a wide margin, and Alabama might be the hottest team in the country, but yeah, it's tough for me to go against the best the best team, and Auburn has been the best team all year, but this is it's great for both of these programs to be in this position. I am stunned this is the first time it's happened in the history of the SEC. I would have figured back somewhere in 1995 that Kentucky and Arkansas would have been in this matchup. Surprised it hasn't happened, but this is a great moment for the conference. It really is. Like to put these 2 teams this late in the season on the docket like this is big.
Yeah, it's really a highlight for and of the SEC's dominance this year and its depth, but dominance over depth, I think, as the teams at the top are more impressive even than the fact that they go 9, 10, 11 teams deep in this conference. Real quick, what are your thoughts on the total, John? If this thing's sitting around mid-170s, look, you just mentioned it. Alabama shot better than 50% from 3 against Texas the other night. They can absolutely blow the lights off the scoreboard. But I do agree, too, that if Auburn's going to go into Tuscaloosa and win this thing, I don't think they can let it become a shootout. So I look at this total, and I lean under because of my belief that that's a bet on Auburn.
Yeah, so if I was going to play the total, it would be the under for sure. I mean, if you're telling me that it is going to be in the mid-170s, low 170s, I mean, I don't think anybody is going to be betting over at that number. I like if it opens 173, for example, right, 173 and a half. I don't think you see that go to 174 and a half, right? I think you see it move down. And also just because it's a rivalry game, right? I mean, just anecdotally, like those games tend to be a little bit more intense, right? And we don't know how it'll be called, so that'll be interesting. But yeah, if I was gonna have a play on the total, it would definitely be on the under, just because I'm thinking it'll be a physical game where the shot making isn't as fluid as we've seen.
Under, man, unders play anyway, and if it's that high, like they would have to give me such amazing juice to get to bet the over. Like it would have to be like a plus 120, plus 130 for me to even consider the over in that one. Yeah, it's just, I mean, the unders play anyway. Who scores in the 90s and unless you're worried about overtime. You're worried about overtime, that changes things. But I mean, who scores who scores 90 points in a college basketball game against a top flight team? You just don't do it.
Yeah, I think, again, if Auburn's going to win this, and I'm not saying Bama can't, especially at home, but if Auburn's going to win this, I do think under is the play. And you can, if you're not comfortable on a side, you can go under, and I think still, in effect, be betting on Auburn, because I think if Bama is going to pull off the upset, they'll have to hit 85, maybe 90, as we've seen Bama do. They're capable of. Saturday afternoon, Houston, Arizona, a matchup of 2 top 15 teams in the Big 12. Current odds to win the Big 12, Houston with that 1-game lead in the conference standings now, the minus 200 favorite at BetMGM. 13th time this will be these 2 teams have met, but the first time as Big 12 conference opponents. Houston beat Zona by a dozen in the Sweet 16 3 years ago, John, and we've talked about them for a few weeks now. They are looking like legitimate national title contenders. We didn't really bring them up a couple minutes ago when we were talking title contenders. Almost, I don't want to say it's an oversight, but it almost feels like they're just a part of the conversation and we don't dwell on them week after week now. They're just there because that's where they belong. Arizona, though, perfect 6-0, pardon me, at home in conference play this year. Houston, conversely, 6-0 on the road in the conference. So this is a tough one. I think just based on Houston's ability to play both ends of the floor, I like them in this one, even if they're laying 2.5, 3, whatever it ends up being. Arizona has cooled off a bit as of late, in my opinion, but I don't know. What's your read on this situation atop the Big 12?
Yeah, I'll be interested to see, what the market does with this one because, like you said, it's 2 at KenPom, Houston by 2 at KenPom, but I wonder if there will be a little bit of a discount given that Arizona just lost, right? Arizona just lost to Kansas State, so I'm hoping we get a little bit of a discount where we can get Houston at a pick because I would love to bet them at a pick. Conversely, sometimes you'll see this like spots will get taxed or whatever the case may be. And if this gets to 3 or 3.5, I'm like, this is getting tempting, for Arizona at home. So it's all just going to depend on what the number is. Sometimes like we'll do this show and like we'll say KenPom is XYZ and like the number actually ends up being kind of different. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it can matter. I mean, it's February college basketball. It gets pretty damn tight. So it all is just going to depend on the number for me. Like I don't want to lay a big number with Houston on the road here. But if it's a pick or even a +1, maybe, I would definitely look to get involved with them.
Yeah, man, like there's only a handful of teams that are better on their adjusted offense and defensive ratings at home than Arizona. I mean, you're looking at Duke, Auburn, Houston, Florida, that are better at home than Arizona is in those metrics. This is a tough spot for Houston to be in. I agree with John. Like if it gets above, I don't see it getting above 3, but if it does, I mean, really kind of hammer Arizona. But at 2, I mean, Houston's a solid team. Like they're one of the handful of title contenders that there is out there. So if it's under 2.5, you could probably be on Houston. But other than that, I wouldn't touch Houston with a bigger number just because Arizona plays so well at home.
Yeah, total on this one. The complete opposite end of the spectrum of what we talked about with Bama and Auburn. This one down in the mid to upper 130s. And look, I mentioned it multiple times this year. I have no problem betting an under in a game involving the Houston Cougars. Whether it ends up working out or not is always a question. Overtime, thank you very much. But I never hate putting money on a Houston Cougars under. Saturday night in the Big Ten, Michigan State visiting the Illini in Champaign. Second meeting of the season between these two teams. Sparty won by a bucket back on January 19th. Michigan State has lost 3 of their last 4. Illinois was hitting a similar skid at one point as well. They had lost 4 of 7 before beating UCLA and maybe righting the ship a little bit, John. Illinois, look, they should be in the conversation, I think, as title contenders, but after what they showed us in late January, I think there's a lot of question marks there. Still, at home, as long as they're not laying more than 4, I think I'm okay with the Illini here. Going on the road in the Big Ten is never a spot I want to bet.
Yeah, I really don't enjoy watching this Illinois team at this point. I've bet them quite a bit, but they're just, and I say this like with love. I do. I mean, I know this is not something to like make light, but like they're a schizophrenic basketball team. You know what I mean? And they do hear voices, and that voice tells them to shoot the 3 every single time. And they never make them, which is the weird thing. It's like, why do you keep doing it? But you do. You keep doing it. So that's like it's like what the definition of insanity in Champaign. Doing the same thing and expecting a different result. They actually came back against Ohio State. A couple of weeks ago. By stopping shooting the 3. I mean, they have that ability to where they can grind it out. If they do that, I mean, because to me against Michigan State, that's what you're going to have to do. They could, but again, am I laying 5? Am I laying 6? Like, I don't really enjoy that idea. So, depending on what that number is, it could be a spot for Michigan State.
Yeah, I would be on Michigan State if it's 5 or 6. Who are the voters? How is Illinois not ranked? Who's voting on
because
this?
they hit a skid. They hit a little bit of a skid here.
But does nobody pay attention to like the metrics at all? Like none of these voters do. Like they just don't even pay attention. Like they're easily a top 15 team according to all the metrics. I'll tell you this: I got to hand it to Tom Izzo. Like I thought he was. If his name wasn't Izzo, I thought he'd been fired a year ago. Like this, they've had 4 straight seasons where they've had 13 losses, and here they are. They're not going to lose 10 games this year. Like, and you don't see coaches of his age adapt to the current landscape of college sports the way he has. I mean, big credit to him. But if this thing is Illinois by 5, I'm going to take Michigan State. I think they're a really, really solid team. I would not surprise me at all to see them on the second weekend. I love what Izzo's done this year, so I'll take Michigan State if it's plus 5.
Yeah, I do think it's an interesting point you bring up, Choppy, about why the hell is this team not ranked. I think you lose to Maryland the way they did, and that was an ugly loss. And then you lose to Nebraska, you lose to Rutgers. And I think what got lost in the sauce a little bit there with those 2 losses is, again, you're on the road in the Big Ten. And I don't want to say road games in other conferences don't matter the same way. That's not what I'm saying at all. On the road in the Big Ten over the last 4 to 5 years has just proven itself to be more of a grind than any. You see a team loses to someone and you go, okay, well, it was on the road. Like it's much more excusable, in my opinion, to lose a Big Ten road game than to necessarily say, no, that's got to be a big black mark on their resume. As you point out, people questioning Illinois' right now and where they're at. We can get you our best bets before we wrap up. Talk a little bubble watch as well. Thanks for joining us. We're live coast to coast on the BetMGM network for BetMGMU.
You've been listening to BetMGMU on the BetMGM network. If you missed any of the show, listen back anytime on the Odyssey app. Download the BetMGM app today. Please gamble responsibly. Get ready to experience the ultimate fusion of wagering and entertainment. This is the BetMGM Network. Kicking off your morning with the Daily Tip with Michael Jenkins and Chelsea Messenger.
Over.
It's a very simple way to look at it. It's the best way to look at it.
Followed by the newly branded Bet Sweats with Joe O and Sammy P.
When I stop talking, that's when you jump in usually.
He said, ring that bell! He said, ring that bell! Then it's You Better You Bet, hosted by Nick Costos and Femi Abebefe.
Great teams and great players get a whistle. It's happened forever. It will continue to happen.
Capped off every night with the electric Brad Evans and Ryan Horvat on BetMGM tonight.
Oh, that's a sexy phrase.
Quote Dr. Dre, creep with me and walk with me on this one.
Welcome to a new era of wagertainment. This is the BetMGM Network. Please gamble responsibly. Get ready to experience the ultimate fusion of wagering and entertainment. This is the BetMGM Network. Kicking off your morning with the Daily Tip with Michael Jenkins and Chelsea Messenger.
Over.
It's a very simple way to look at it. It's the best way to look at it.
Followed by the newly branded Bet Sweats with Joe O and Sammy P.
When I stop talking, that's when you jump in usually.
He said, ring that bell! He said, ring that bell! Then it's You Better You Bet, hosted by Nick Costos and Femi Abebefe.
Great teams and great players get a whistle. It's happened forever. It will continue to happen.
Capped off every night with the electric Brad Evans and Ryan Horvat on BetMGM tonight.
Oh, that's a sexy phrase.
Quote Dr. Dre, creep with me and walk with me on this one.
Welcome to a new era of wagertainment. This is the BetMGM Network. Please gamble responsibly. Let's get back to BetMGM on the BetMGM Network.
We got you covered every Friday night and Saturday morning. We are live coast to coast with BetMGM right here on the BetMGM Network alongside John Martin and RJ Choppy. I'm Chris Mack. We will get you our best bets of the weekend in just a moment. Take a look at the bubble as well. Which teams do we believe in and not believe in? Who still has to do some work and who should work their way off that bubble sooner rather than later and onto one of those lines of the bracket. But I mentioned having you covered all weekend long, not just here inside the Odyssey app, free to download at AUDACY, but the BetMGM Network also has you covered every single Sunday, breaking it all down. Everything that happened on Saturday, whether it's college hoops, NBA, anything going on in the NFL offseason as well. Spring training right around the corner. Every single weekend, we've got Sunday's bets from 9 a.m. to noon Eastern with Pat Boyle and Sean Marash in New York. Then from noon to 4, PJ Glasser and Denton Day take you to the nation's capital for Inside the Betting Lines. And we wrap it up live from Dallas with Bet Nation, Eric Chiafalo and Zach Wolchuk from 4 to 8 Eastern, 3 to 7 Central. Every single Sunday as you're running around trying to get things done, you take the BetMGM Network with you. Presented by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. John, before we get to our best bets, let's talk about the bubble that I mentioned. Right now, according to Bracket Matrix, which averages in everybody's bracketology, the last 4 in are Georgia, Wake Forest, San Diego State, and I mentioned them earlier, here comes Cal and them Hogs, Arkansas, with wins against Michigan and on the road at Kentucky and Texas, although that Longhorns win probably not looking as good now as it did when it happened. They don't have any quad 3 or quad 4 losses. And in that conference, maybe that's the excuse, right? Well, you're not going to have a quad 3 or quad 4 loss once you get to conference play. But I think there is something to be said, like I mentioned earlier, for getting hot at the right time of the year.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of why you don't have one, you still don't have one, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, it's still a fact. You know, and let's not forget that this Arkansas team was picked 4th in the SEC to start the season. I mean, there was a reason for that. Boogie Flan goes down, and it feels like other guys have kind of stepped up into, you know, more natural roles. Like you're seeing Janelle Davis look like the Janelle Davis from 2 years ago at FAU. You know, guys are just kind of coming along. Big Z, right, had a big night against LSU. I think Wake Forest is going to find itself on the wrong side of the bubble when those brackets update, just because they lost at home on Wednesday night to Florida State. They were up 14 with 7 minutes to go. Choppy had Wake Forest money line to close out a parlay, and
I don't know about that.
they just couldn't hold on. They just couldn't hold on. They blow it there late. Florida State now 2-0 since Leonard Hamilton announced he was retiring. So take that for what it's worth. But yes, I think Arkansas is definitely on the right track here. They've stamped that Kentucky win. That wasn't just a, hey, we're emotional, we're going to go in here and do it. I mean, they, like you said, they've beaten Texas. they competed with Alabama and beat LSU. So, they keep it up. They keep winning 3 or 4. They're going to find themselves in.
Man, only in 2025 SEC could you lose 7 of your last 11 and improve your standing in the tournament bracket. I mean, that's the kind of world that we are living in. This is an interesting predicament for the committee. Like, let's just say you get down to Arkansas and San Diego State. Like, Arkansas has played this gauntlet of a schedule, SEC. San Diego State, they've played 3 ranked teams, and they've beaten 2 of them. So in the limited opportunity they've had, they've performed really, really well. Like, how do you break down those teams? Is a certain conference, is the SEC going to get the benefit of the doubt versus, like, the wins do matter? How many times do we hear that in college football this year? At some point the wins have to matter. And if you're a team like San Diego State, where you've done nothing but basically win your games, and it's you versus Arkansas, how do you pick?
I honestly think, and we're all guilty of this, I think, at times, but the committee is just like the rest of us when they get together, pick these things out. I mentioned it earlier. There's something, recency bias is a real thing. That term exists because it actually happens. And they're going to look at San Diego State's wins on neutral courts early in the year, and then they're going to look at the strength of their conference, and they're going to go, well, but, and, in this example, they're going to look at Arkansas and the SEC schedule and being hot down the stretch. And I think that probably answers your question, Choppy. It's why Arkansas, if you can still catch them at plus 120, plus 125 to make the field, I put that down, and I count on Cal getting them right, John, before SEC tournament time, and then obviously by Selection Sunday.
Yeah, Choppy texted me earlier the week, told me he put a big bet on Arkansas to win the national championship. Said he's just been inspired by their. I'm just lying about RJ completely. It's my second time I've lied about RJ's bets. I don't know why it brings me such entertainment.
It's not a lie if you believe it. It's the Costanza principle.
Right.
That's right.
That's right. No, but I had Arkansas in the top 10 to start the year. I mean, I was a big believer in, this idea that Cal would, go to Fayetteville and, be rejuvenated for the first time, kind of have a little bit of fire in his belly, right? Because we tend to get complacent. We tend to get comfortable in our jobs. When we've been there for so long, we're not going to get fired. What are they going to do? Fire me? Who are they going to hire after me? So you get a little comfortable. Yeah, that's right. And it goes to show you, nobody's indispensable, right? But I do. I think they are. It's not too late. You still have a month left in the season. You have your conference tournament. Arkansas has a lot of runway here to straighten this out and get back into the field.
Let's talk about the teams that are listed first 4 out on Bracket Matrix right now, and which ones have a legitimate chance of working their way back into the conversation. You've got Cincinnati. Not a lot of big wins, I don't think, on their resume. They're just kind of there. Pitt, they did win in Columbus earlier this year. I just had my big impassioned plea about winning on the road in the Big Ten earlier. I guess it still counts, even if it's a non-conference game. But some ugly losses as well. SMU, we'll keep it in the ACC for just a second. 0-4 in Quad 1. And then BYU, they've got some nice wins on the road at West Virginia is one in particular, I think, that still counts for something. No big losses outside in the lower 3 quadrants. So how much work has to be done by any of these 4 teams to still sneak their way in, John?
A lot. I will say Cincinnati, you mentioned them. I'm trying to figure out whether or not I like them. I'm trying to figure out whether or not they're good because they looked really, really bad about a month ago, 2-3 weeks ago. in the season. And, they've actually won, 3 in a row? They got a nice one over BYU the other day. So I'm trying to figure out Cincinnati. Could that be a team that, is actually, peaking here? But look, you're on the bubble. You're on the bubble for a reason. You got work to do.
Yeah.
BYU feels like one of those teams that always just seems to, if they get in, they can do a little damage. That nobody really wants to play them. And then, I've seen a little bit of SMU this year. Look, they're a solid team. They're going to be one of those teams that we're going to talk about come Selection Sunday. Did they get hosed? Did they not? I don't see them as a team that is going to go out there and win a couple of games in this tournament. I'm going to put my stamp on SMU as not one of those teams.
Yeah. I mentioned Kansas State earlier. This is that sort of soft, gooey middle of the Big 12 where you're trying to figure out, like John, you just said about Cincinnati. Are they good? Are they not? They're capable occasionally of rising up and winning a big one on the road because everybody gets to go to Morgantown at some point or, go to Waco. And then every single one of them is also capable of just flopping at home sometimes. So, you look at BYU, you look at Kansas State, you look at Cincy, you look at WVU, and you go, yeah, but there's a lot of buts with this soft middle of the Big 12, as it were, once you push past the top 5 teams in that conference who are all ranked. All right, time to get them our best bets for the weekend here on BetMGM. Choppy, I'll let you get us started. What do you got?
I'm going to go with Michigan State +5. If that's the number, I'm going to go Michigan State +5 against Illinois. I think they're the better team. Illinois is tough at home, but I'll take the +5.
John?
I'm going to assume we get Alabama at a pick'em. That's what I'm going to assume. Right. And I'm going to bet Alabama at a pick'em. That's what I'm going to do because I'm just so intoxicated by the way they play offensively, and it just sticks out so much in college basketball, right? That I think they're going to be able to generate enough good looks, and they have guys that can make them. So in this home tilt, and I think they'll even it up, right, when it gets back to Auburn. But I think in this one, Alabama gets it done at home.
So I got a couple here. Bama Auburn, the total we talked about earlier. I really like the under. If that number stays as high as it's being projected, then absolutely I'm going to take the under on Bama Auburn. I mentioned it earlier. Every week I bet a Houston Cougars under at some point, and those always feel pretty safe. Like I said, unless that thing's going to overtime, give me an under on almost any Houston game. I'll do that this weekend as well against Arizona. And then I'm going to throw a couple futures, and you boys can tell me if I'm crazy. We talked about them earlier. Texas Tech national title at 40-1. Gonzaga national title is out there at 50-1. Why not at this point? As like I said, we're down to the final 3 weeks of the regular season. 5-6 weeks from now, all of these things will have paid off or be balled up and at the bottom of a garbage can here in my office. So it's futures at this point with just 5-6 weeks to go. I'm okay laying a few bucks, maybe even a little bit more on each of them, John. Texas Tech 40-1, Gonzaga 50-1. Let's start to dive in to the deep end.
Yeah, I think that, listen, you're kind of buying really low on Gonzaga here at 50-1. They were definitely not that at the start of the season. I think they were 16-1, 20-1, something along those lines. We see it all the time. I mean, you have peaks and valleys throughout a season, and the goal, right, is to capture those teams when they're at the valley if you think they're going to peak again. And I think Gonzaga definitely fits that criteria.
Nobody want UConn at 30-1?
No. Dan Hurley's losing his mind. They're going to implode.
Like
I don't think it's a good losing his mind, Choppy. That sounds like a good conversation to table for next weekend's show, UConn and everything else going on in the world of college hoops. We'll do it again, always inside your Odyssey app in podcast form, just waiting for you, AUDACY. For RJ Choppy, for John Martin, for our producer, Zach Kroll, I'm Chris Mack. This has been BetMGMU.
You've been listening to BetMGM U on the BetMGM Network. If you missed any of the show, listen back anytime on the Odyssey app. Download the BetMGM app today. Please gamble responsibly. Get ready to experience the ultimate fusion of wagering and entertainment. This is the BetMGM Network. Kicking off your morning with the Daily Tip with Michael Jenkins and Chelsea Messenger.
Over.
It's a very simple way to look at it. It's the best way to look at it.
Followed by the newly branded Bet Sweats with Joe O and Sammy P.
When I stop talking, that's when you jump in usually.
He said, ring that bell! He said, ring that bell!
Then it's You Better You Bet, hosted by Nick Costos and Femi Abebefe.
Great teams and great players get a whistle. It's happened forever. It will continue to happen.
Capped off every night with the electric Brad Evans and Ryan Horvat on BetMGM tonight.
Oh, that's a sexy phrase.
Quote Dr. Dre, creep with me and walk with me on this one.
Welcome to a new era of wagertainment. This is the BetMGM Network. Please gamble responsibly. Get ready to experience the ultimate fusion of wagering and entertainment. This is the BetMGM Network. Kicking off your morning with the Daily Tip with Michael Jenkins and Chelsea Messenger.
Over.
It's a very simple way to look at it. It's the best way to look at it.
Followed by the newly branded Bet Sweats with Joe O and Sammy P.
When I stop talking, that's when you jump in usually.
He said, ring that bell! He said, ring that bell!
Then it's You Better You Bet, hosted by Nick Costos and Femi Abebefe.
Great teams and great players get a whistle. It's happened forever. It will continue to happen.
Capped off every night with the electric Brad Evans and Ryan Horvat on BetMGM tonight.
Oh, that's a sexy phrase.
Quote Dr. Dre, creep with me and walk with me on this one.
Welcome to a new era of wagertainment. This is the BetMGM Network. Please gamble responsibly.